vibration. Energy, frequency, vibration.
What's going on, world? Welcome back. It is FNX, Carlos De Japaro. This is another episode of the Universal Frequency, and I am excited to get into tonight's discussion. But before we get started, we got to show some love to the sponsor. So here we go. Okay, cool, man. Absolutely. Happy Saturday, everybody. And today we're going to bring back a topic that I discussed previously, but I don't think it gets enough recognition. It's redlining. So the systematic process of steering colored home purchasers out of certain communities, restricting them from making purchases, impacting home value, and basically steering Black and brown people into impoverished environments, which was done at a very high level within our banking system. It's one of the practices today that now banks have training regarding it, so they can understand what its impact should not be, if I'm saying that correctly. But ultimately, there's still some real life implications to this day, and I wanted to bring this back to mind. So we're gonna get going into it, man.
Yeah,
So all right, so first off, let's talk about, since we know what redlining is, let's talk about some of the historical impacts of redlining. Let's just get into it. And we're gonna pull this up. All right, so this, here we go. And now we should be able to see it. Hold on. Add the screen. There we go. Okay, perfect. So this is from the Primary Care Development Corporation. This is an article from 2020. Just historic findings about redlining and health disparities for New Yorkers. So I think this is actually a great example because New York is a microcosm of people living on top of each other, really diverse environment. And there are some systematic issues that I think can be really tied directly to what redlining. So just to bring it back to speed, in 1938, the Homeowners Loan Corporation created the so-called residential security maps to guide entities towards practicing responsible lending. Neighborhoods deemed hazardous for lending were outlined in red, a process today we know now as redlining. These maps were used as a basis to systematically deny mortgages and services to residents of redline neighborhoods, regardless of credit worthiness. Let's stop right there, CJ. All right.
Yeah.
So what does that mean to you?
Well, the first thing that stands out, I think, for me is a lot of people don't understand what we mean when we talk about systemic racism. And redlining is definitely one of the tools that effectively carried out this task and shape the way that a lot of these communities still look like to this day, still suffering from the same conditions that haven't changed much since 1938. Let's be honest. If it was a impoverished area in that time, there's a pretty good chance it's still like that now, unless it got highly gentrified, which is a whole nother conversation. But again, it just goes back to show all of the challenges and how long we've been facing challenges as people of color to achieve simple stuff, just something as simple as buying a home, which is a dream for most of us. In fact, it's sold as the quote unquote American dream. It's what everyone's chasing, right? But what they didn't say is that, hey, if you're a person of color, it might be a little bit different for you.
Yeah, and what we know about home ownership is it's one of the biggest wealth distribution tactics in this country. Home ownership, small business, and inheritance. And the fact that people of color were systematically either denied or had barriers put up for them being able to purchase their homes despite their credit worthiness is crazy. I mean, just looking at this article, in 1938, the Homeowners Loan Corporation created these so-called security maps, but for a reason. But this wasn't banned until 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. And we all obviously know that just because that was put into so-called law, that it was still practiced. and that there's still like decades of systematically steering people of color into less quality neighborhoods, preventing them from owning homes despite how worthy that they were. And it's just crazy. And I have a lot. I have a lot of thoughts on this because I remember growing up, people would say the term "ghetto booty scratcher." Remember? You remember the? I don't know if
Yeah,
you.
I heard it on the playground for sure. Yeah.
And it was like, yo, and when they wanted to insult someone, they would say you're ghetto this or ghetto that. When the reality is, the reason why many of us or many of our families were still in these ghettos is because they were systematically denied financing or systematically denied the same opportunities that people of other colors were not denied. There's also a point in the banking history where the branch managers would decision loans and it wouldn't even look at credit. It just really came down to whether the branch manager wanted to write the loan.
Right, right. And let's be honest, like, yeah, we get the Fair Housing Act in 1968, which was supposed to effectively eradicate this practice, but redlining, just like racism, is highly adaptable. So I think that we still get manifestations of these, shady practices today. It's just done. The banks just got a little bit more creative, and in today's example, we're going to see a real life example of how that happened when it came to the valuation of the value of someone's home by an appraiser.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which is crazy. All right. So this document from the Primary Care Development Corporation from 2020, it finds that formerly redline areas have a poverty rate of 3.6 times out of A-rated census tracts. 3.6 times higher poverty rate. I wonder why. I wonder why.
Mhm.
When we think about people being systematically prevented from being able to purchase a home in a better neighborhood, if they came from one of these communities, just means you're keeping people poor. And that's almost like guerrilla warfare, to be honest with you. Because um, trying to get over the hump, trying to put yourself into a better situation, and I know that many of my friends and family that are first or second generation Americans can understand this plight of what it takes to come here and really try to establish your roots. Purchasing that home is essential. Getting that space where your kids can grow and you can have family invest into that, maybe that community or that property, or just have a safe space. It just it's just so effed up, bro.
Yeah,
That's what I'm trying to.
it's also like it's no secret that in America, like the path to true financial freedom, is done through real estate and entrepreneurship. Very seldom do you find financially free individuals, and real estate is not some way, somehow, or deeply involved in their everyday financial life. And the other thing that's concerning for me is, let's be honest, when the the banks try to supposedly do the right thing by virtue of legislation, which really doesn't mean they were trying to do the right things. I mean, you got caught now. The government, it was so bad the government had to intervene and make things better. What are you gonna do for those generations of irreparable damage that you did to these communities, and you offered no restitution, you offered no reparations?
Right.
We're literally moving the starting line back for these families generations, and you want to pretend every day that we're all starting from the same starting line, and it's just not true. And that's just in one aspect, right? But you have to think about it like the bigger picture, right? Because some people say, oh well, it's just a home, maybe there's other ways that this family could pull themselves up from their bootstraps. But for a lot of people, home ownership is a huge part of their net worth. It's how they finance a lot of different things in their own lives, or even try to get control of their own debt. And an even bigger one is how a lot of families pay for higher learning for their children or themselves. Like,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
you know what I'm saying? And how many times have you heard of people like, it never happened for me, but I have wealthy friends, and they literally inherit portfolios of real estate that legitimately just completely changes their life and how they move around, which is another important aspect of it. So think about it: if someone in our ancestry was able to acquire something fairly years ago, and now you inherit it, your life would look completely different. But now understanding there were legitimate laws, that were trying to prevent that, it kind of all makes sense why today's landscape looks the way that it does.
That have long lasting effects. So let's
Yeah.
read some of these other facts and then we'll react to it.
Hmm.
The proportion of black residents in red line areas is 9.1 times higher than that of A-rated census tracts. 17.8% of adults in formerly redline areas are uninsured, compared to 6.4% A-rated census tracts. That's 3 times as much, just about. 26.6% of adults in formerly redline areas are obese, compared to 16.2% A-rated census tracts. So if you grew up in a red line area, you are more likely to be obese, you are more likely to be uninsured, and you're more likely to live along the poverty line.
Hmm.
That is, if that is not some very specific, very specific impact, I don't know what is. That's keeping people poor
Yeah, intentionally, systematically.
systematically.
You know what I mean?
It's like I really want to ask is like how we know it's not a coincidence, right? Because it's almost too poignant, you know?
Yeah, no, it's a deliberate campaign. I think we have plenty of evidence for that.
Yeah.
So no
And
surprises there.
and I get a lot of we all have friends on different sides of the political aisle, right? Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberal, whatever it may be. You may have some patriots, you may have some people that aren't as patriotic. But a lot of the conversations we have, I know sometimes I get the hey, it can't possibly just be about race. It can't be that. This right here, it's clearly based on race.
Right, right. It's wild is because I have conversations with these people, and they really feel like some way somehow that capitalism treats all people fairly, and it just doesn't. Not especially not in America. And there's so many examples and studies and reports and literal laws to try to convey that to them, and why they can't see it for themselves. I don't. Maybe because they're not being adversely affected by it. In fact, there's a lot of people in this country, they actually benefit from the fact that this is how it works.
Right, right. And the whole pull it up, pull yourself up by the bootstrap.
Ugh.
You don't work hard enough.
Right,
You know what's
right.
wrong with black people in this country? Why
If
can't they
I
get
could do
ahead?
it, you could do it.
Right, right. But when we start to look at things at a macro level, there are so many events and policies in place, specifically within this country, to keep people of color subservient.
Mm.
When we think about Black Wall Street and every one of those instances that occur like it, right? Talking about thriving Black communities, independent on their own, that were burned to the ground simply because they were thriving and they were Black. That's
That's
it.
crazy.
Right. It is the Philadelphia move bombing, which is crazy. Which
Yeah.
if you Google that, we need a whole episode on that.
Yeah, I would love. I think what's really important too. I can't tell you how many people don't know the story of Black Wall Street. I think that's probably one we should dedicate an episode to, just kind of break it down for folks and
Yeah.
understand, what really went down there, and what uh, sentiments are kind of still lingering to this day that even sparked, Black Wall Street and back in Tulsa. That still exists to this day, and we see little remnants of it every day.
Yeah, man. When I think about now that we know what redlining is, we've been able to identify it. You can't even quantitate the impact or the dollars quantified by like, hey, how did this affect this family's financially?
Right.
To that one credit-worthy Black borrower, right, in 1943, who had the income, who had the profile, but they just did not sell it to him because he was a person of color. How does that compare to another family who was able to buy that house and then either leverage that property and land, because this is also about land, which is a deeper conversation, but leverage that property and land into equity, into other assets? Think about that accentuator right there over 2 or 3 generations. It's not a coincidence as much as they want to make it be like, oh well, again, if you just sacrifice and and do all the right things, you'll get there. No, this is a race that we're all not running fairly.
No, no, absolutely not. And not only that, there's like information, right? So for a lot of people, that's how their family did it for so long, whether it's because they had the opportunity or the privilege of getting higher learning, financial literacy. We know in our community we don't always get that from our parents. It's more of like a just get out there, work, do your best, pay your bills. A lot of people I've actually heard from my own community that the myth that owning a home is I don't even want to deal with that. Like someone put in their mind that it's much harder. You don't even want to deal with that. It's easier to rent. Don't tie yourself down without not really understanding, the impact that it would have on their life if they did decide, to own.
That's a Jedi mind trick. For
It
real.
really is. It really is.
I feel like that's misinformation put out there to keep people stupid and to keep them poor. Because
Right.
ultimately land is a resource that they're not making any new land. Right? It's a finite resource.
Right.
And the amount of land that you own over time directly correlates with wealth. It's why when you see very rich people purchase land in West Bumble, whatever, because the land comes with resources, streams, potentially oil, fresh water sources, whatever it may be. Land has value, and when we are prevented or groomed to think that home ownership is not essential, we are also taking ourselves out of the conversation of owning land.
Mhm.
And I know in southern parts of this country, there was acres and acres of land that were owned by Black families at one point. But over the course of time, whether it be most of the time, someone coming and buying up the land,
Right.
but they would even doing things.
Or eminent domain, for
Yeah,
infrastructure. Let's
yeah,
that
yeah.
happens.
I went to see my mother in Santee, South Carolina this year, and I was talking to one of the liquor store owners, and he was saying about how they systematically wanted to get certain business owners that own not only their business but the building and the land on it out out of the business, and they would even do things like start family fights. So when the elder passes away,
That's
the
crazy.
family will bicker and then sell the property.
Who even thinks like that? Who even thinks such sinister ways, bro? That's wild. That's
Yo, he
crazy.
told me that. I'm like, yo,
That's
what?
crazy.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah. And the crazy part is, it's also been people that look like him. There's also been some Black people that have played a part in that role. Those gatekeepers, that for whatever reason have no problem being an instrument of destruction, for
Yeah.
their own community. But yeah, man, we
Well,
have to own land.
because remember, land ownership and home equity comes power. Let's
Right.
be honest. That there's power that comes when you're a landowner. You have a say in your community now. You're a taxpayer now.
Yep.
It literally empowers a community, especially if it was a community of color that were all landowners, and making sure the value stays there helps feed what my community looks like, what the schooling looks like, what the social services look like, how frequently does it happen, the cleanup, things like that. That's why you see a lot of certain communities where you're like, oh, why does it look like this, or why is the school like that? It's like, well, they're the banks and the appraisal companies are synthetically lowering the value, right? There's a lot of them are slumlords. They want to put a nickel into the property, take a dollar out. So
Yep.
this is going to have a long standing compounding effect of what that community is going to look like for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Mm. All right. So let's get to the other article, bro.
Yeah, this
This
was
is
dope. So this one, I thought I was actually scrolling through Instagram, and it was just a headline, because I don't know about you, but I have these conversations where people really try to convince me that racism is something that always happens outside of themselves or outside of where we presently are, and there's no evidence to show that it actually like devalued your quality of life or changed your life or that is even adversely affecting you. And I'm like, this is a perfect article because not only does it show that that's not true, it quantifies it in the form of an appraisal.
Yeah. And for all the people that believe that addressing race and the dynamics is race baiting, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
We're just simply addressing things for what they are.
Yeah, they
Yeah, and
exist.
that's
It exists. It
yeah.
exists. Like we cannot deny that.
So home appraised with a Black owner 472,000, with a white owner 750,000. I didn't even do the math but that got to be like 150% or something like that. Like, huh? Like that's 140. I'm never gonna pull. I got to pull out the calculator.
It's a significant swing.
That's a huge swing.
And what's important to highlight too is who they did it to. This is a history professor from the Johns Hopkins University who actually is an expert on redlining. This is who they did it to. They picked the wrong one. They picked the wrong one.
Yo, this is nuts, yo. So Nathan Connolly and Shani Mott are suing an appraiser and a mortgage lender after their Baltimore home was estimated to be worth $472,000. After the couple removed any indications that Black people lived there, a second appraiser valued the home at $750,000. And yo, it's almost comical, and I'm trying to laugh because it hurts a little bit, right. It's that blatant. But first off, when it comes to appraisers, lenders cannot influence how a property is appraised now, right? These are independent professionals that take comparable sales within a certain radius within the most recent year with square footage to find like properties if there is ever a discrepancy in value.
Right.
So
that's what they're supposed to do.
That's what they're supposed to do.
Theory, right.
So if this property was really worth $750,000, I want to know what comparables were they using for the first appraisal.
I'm glad you mentioned it because the article actually spells out what that initial appraiser did. He cherry picked comparables that were not even in the same, not comparable. So one of them was extremely low. I believe it was a fixer upper. Dr. Connolly's home was not a fixer-upper. They did major investments, look, $35,000 renovations, brand new $5,000 tankless water. They made improvements. It was by no means a fixer-upper. So they threw a fixer-upper in there. Then they threw in another low-value property outside of the area where Dr. Connolly's home was in a predominantly Black neighborhood, which obviously, from situations like this, they kept bringing the value down. Again, not a good comparable. So that's exactly how they did it, and you'll see that the second appraiser actually used comps from the neighborhood, to get the true value of the home, and that's where we see such a crazy swing. But the fact that the initial appraiser, here's the other problem. 97% of home appraisers are white. I did not know that until I read this article.
But the thing is, that shouldn't matter, right?
No, it shouldn't, but it does, because at the end of the day, let's be honest. 97% of home appraisers being white, is that representative of the communities that they're trying to appraise? So there's going to be situations that they're not going to know, they're not going to understand, and it's completely subjective. It should be more diverse. How much it would change, I don't know, but I know that much concentration of a specific group of people doing a very important aspect. I mean, think about it. This group of people single-handedly set the valuation for homes in the United States. That's a pretty important job. In fact, it's so important, I didn't even know this, but the Biden administration actually is putting together a agency to combat this. I did not know this. If you scroll down, you will see. Where is it at? We're looking into. So President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, they want to overhaul the appraisal industry, and they created the creation of the Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity. Bro, again, just like in, 1938 or whatever, when they tried to take care of redlining, it literally is so ugly. Government intervention is needed. It's wild. It's really wild.
This is purposeful. So that first appraiser was like, man, I'm going to screw them over.
We can't say that because the New York Times.
The first appraiser that went out of their way to find old appraisals, right, and not from this neighborhood, and cherry pick the worst possible ones. You do not do that by coincidence.
Correct. So what we do have evidence of is that he did not use industry standards to come up with this valuation, including certain deductions. Like if you're on a busy street, the industry standard is to deduct about 2% of the value for it being on a busy street. This dude deducted like 50 grand off the value. That's just one deduction. They didn't itemize all deduction, but just to kind of put you in the minds of how wild the first appraiser was, you know, deducting 50 grand on value for being on a quote unquote busy street. It's like you already knew this man came with malice, you know, in his heart for whatever reason.
Yeah, man. And these are things that have long lasting impact.
Right.
Like we have friends and family that act crazy because of the environment that they grew up in. And then the environment that they grew up in was very much could have been a product of systematic prejudice, systematic financial prejudice.
You know what else is crazy? If you look at Dr. Connie's life and what they tell our people to do all the time, like do the right thing, good things will happen. He followed the rules. Right. Highly educated. You know, he's an educator himself now at a university. Did all right, buying a home, doing it all right, and the system still find a way to penalize him. And it had to, we haven't gotten to the main point. So how did we get from the 430 something thousand appraisal all the way to 750? What changed? Well, for one, also the impact. Remember, the initial appraisal actually caused them to get denied. The appraisal was the only reason why the initial mortgage application was not approved. So then he felt.
I have an issue with that, by the way, as well.
Yeah, of course, and hold that thought. So
yeah.
So he gets denied, and he obviously is, because this is his expertise, knows that it's because he's black. So what does Dr. Connolly and his family do? They whitewashed a scenario. Now, what do I mean by that? He took down a Black Panther poster that was on the wall. He put away all black literature. He took away family photos and actually replaced them with like stock white photos from like things from like IKEA. And he actually had one of his white colleagues be present for the second appraisal. This is how we got to this. He literally, he talked about the process of intentionally whitewashing his life and having the tough conversation with his kids, trying to explain like, why are you doing this? And he had to explain to them why Daddy was doing what he had to do, and it was through that act of whitewashing his own home, his own private residence, that was what led to ultimately let's not even say a higher appraisal, but what the house was actually worth.
Yeah. So I have an issue with that bank issuing the first decline. That because when an appraisal comes in that doesn't look right, underwriters look at these. Right, that's just part of the mortgage process, the consumer lending process. Underwriters look at them, and I've experienced conversations where underwriters can look at an appraisal and say, "Hey, this is not a quality one," and they can go back to the appraiser and ask questions. Hey, why did you use these comps instead of these? Right? What was the purpose of comparing this home that wasn't sold in the past year or doesn't have the same square footage? Or why did you deduct this? Why did you deduct $50,000 for being on a busy street when it should have been 2%? Those conversations typically should have been had before a decline was issued.
On one hand, yes, that is true. But on the other hand, underwriters are not appraisers. And a lot of them are, miles away, states away from where they're doing business. A lot of these underwriters work for online companies where they'll never actually personally meet the individual. So the numbers is all they have to go by. And
on the appraisal, it clearly says use this comp from 3 years ago.
Right. But
that's
appraisals,
what I'm saying.
I mean, we know that appraisals, not appraisers, underwriters for the most part, they tend to be like just box checkers. Like, all right, I'm going through what the bank taught me. This goes here, this goes there. Punch it in, yes or no. But critical thought doesn't always happen. And I personally experienced this. In my own profession, where I have to literally pick up the phone and break something down to an underwriter, and it's not their fault. They're trained to think in a certain way, because remember, an underwriter's main priority is not the client. It really isn't. It's mitigating the risk for the bank. That's all they really care about. That's why their guidelines are so stringent. And let's be honest, since post 2008, even worse now. I mean, the banks are probably as conservative as they've ever been, with the most oversight and protections and regulations than ever before. So, I wouldn't expect an underwriter to know that. So that's why I feel the Biden administration, a little Freudian slip there. The Biden administration is taking a step in the right direction by trying to overhaul that, or at least give it more oversight to understand that, hey, this is really impacting communities that we represent, and something does have to get done. Like, but
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on
but
that.
to what extent, I don't know, because let's be
Yeah.
honest, we all know that just because the government comes in and oversees a certain aspect of the economy or the country doesn't mean it's going to improve. If that was the case, America would not look the way that it looks. You know what I'm saying? But I think what it can do is give people like us a little bit more leverage when it's time to hold them accountable, when we realize that this is happening to me. Because think about it, before that, where do you
that
go?
decline letter went out, there should have been someone that looked at the file. Why did it get declined? Oh, low appraisal. Let me look at the appraisal. Especially, you can do a Zillow search to see, what other properties in the area are appraised at, right? I mean, there's ways for them to take a look at these numbers. So I'm just saying, before a decline should have been issued, this should have been escalated and an ROV should have been done. An ROV is called a return of value. I've personally submitted an ROV, and it's basically like saying, hey, you use these comps. Can we use these comps because these are better? And they go back and it gets adjusted. So it should have been caught. Which is the bank part of this lawsuit, or is it just the appraiser?
The mortgage company. So I believe
the mortgage company.
I'm sorry, not the mortgage company. They had nothing to do with it. He's suing the appraisal company. The
appraisal company. Yeah,
I think it's called 2020 Homes or something like that. It's here somewhere, because I don't want to.
Yo, there's just so many ways. Yeah, there's just so many ways it didn't have to go down like that. And again, these
2020
are just
valuations. I'm sorry. So
2020 valuations.
The 2020 valuations was a vendor for Loan Depot. So they approached Loan Depot, and then Loan Depot contracted 2020 valuations for the appraisal.
Oh, good, man. That's crazy.
It is. Crazy. But let's be honest. I think all parties, banks aren't innocent. These mortgage companies aren't innocent. The appraisal companies are clearly not innocent. So it does beg the question. So why do this? Why such this disparate
to purposely fuck people? I'll say it.
You know
right?
what I'm saying?
Come on.
I'm gonna let you say it. But as we unpack what that means, like, to purposely fuck people is to make sure that they don't gain more power. They don't gain more economic and financial freedom. Because what this does is when you do that on that level, you get to perpetuate the status quo of how things are now. And for a lot of people, they wish things were, how many times you heard them say the good old days? I'm like, if you're talking about the 40s and the 50s as the good old days, what do you mean by that? You know what I mean?
Shout out to DnkybongsTV tuning in. definitely appreciate you. And that's the only thing I can think of. The reason why you would go out of your way to give this home the lowest possible value, because a person of color owns it, and then the same owner changes out all the variables of his skin color to that of a white person, and it comes back 250 grand higher, 150 grand higher, whatever it is, right? It's staggering. It's staggering, and I don't think, and that could not have been done by an accident.
No, it was overt.
This was overt.
Yeah, I'm glad too. I'm actually, shout out to the New York Times for putting this story out there, and I hope it gains more traction. And I hope a lot more of these kind of lawsuits continue to happen. And not only that, I hope something happens where we now have recourse for when we feel we're in the situation, and I can appeal an appraisal, or at least hold them accountable when they try to, do something to me and one of my people when we're trying to, make moves and do what we got to do. Another thing I want to bring up too is, so the decline is one thing, right? But how many times, let's say that we do have to also face the reality that sometimes when we're approved, it's usually at a higher rate than our white counterparts as well.
That's another thing that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing that occurs, and that's a whole different conversation, because we're going to need we gotta have to arm ourselves with the facts, right?
But we know it's true.
We know,
It's
yeah,
true.
yeah, they
You
know
know,
it's true.
with what they do with credit ratings and how there's disparities in that world as well. Again,
Hey, yo,
something
check this
that's
out. Hold on. Yo, $20,000 was also deducted for quality of
bro.
construction.
This
Yo,
wild shit was in here, bro.
that's
Wild shit
just
was in here. Like it made no
yo.
sense. No, for whatever reason, the thing that really stood out to me was the fact that he had to take down his poster from Black Panther. Like I want you, like I want you to like for me that was probably the most powerful
Right.
image in my head. Like here I am, literally bringing something down of myself that matters to me. I'm bringing it down. You know, I'm hiding myself to kind of acquiesce to the situation just to be treated fairly. This is crazy. You know what I mean? Like that's like that image in my head. Imagine for a young black male or any person of
Right,
color
yeah.
having to bring that what matters to them. Like for me, for me to be like, yo, I gotta take down my giant Puerto Rican flag in my office if I get like an appraiser. That's crazy. Like I gotta hide my identity so that way I can get treated fairly. And like psychologically and just thinking about that, I don't have the words to explain it, but that's gonna have an impact on somebody.
The question that I have is, so this overt discrimination, right? If that's what we're saying, maybe, but this overt intention of this appraiser to screw this person of color with the value of his home. Um, yes, we are able to identify this occurrence, but just think about all the other ones where there are people being denied refinances, they're being denied purchases, or getting
Mm.
loans at higher rates, or just having their overall financial wellness in their portfolio negatively impacted simply by the color of their skin, right? What is it going to take, or how do we even begin to get our hands around this sort of process, right? How do we stop these things from occurring? um like I feel like it doesn't matter how much infrastructure or policy you put in place. It really has to be the people who are carrying out these services that have to not want to purposely screw people over. Am I articulating that correctly?
I think so. The way I look at it is, if we want to change organizations always start and finish with people. So we have to first deal with the people, the mindset.
Right.
So for one, it's calling it out. So that's why I wanted to give props to New York Times for doing this, because um, putting stories out here like this, is it a super sexy tragic story that's going to sell? No, but there are people who are interested in stories like this, and the fact that it is out there and even us sharing it, this will have a trickle effect that it obviously got the attention of the Biden administration. It's going to get the attention of the banks. You know what I'm saying? Like, you mean to tell me, just there are CEOs and regional executives who are going to pick up this weekend, read this article, and not think differently when they go back to work on Monday? Like, even if they don't want to do the right thing, they just don't want to get caught doing the wrong thing, because now there's going to be a tangible cost associated to that and their jobs and their organizations, the financial performance. So for whatever reasons they do it, that's fine, as long as we start getting treated fairly with some dignity, some respect, when it comes to home valuations, and then other things too, because it goes far deeper than just that. But for today, we're just talking about this.
Yeah, I saw another article that I thought may have been interesting, but I got to sign up for the New York Times, which I probably should. But it was about black homeowners being denied mortgages at a disparate rate,
Mm.
which is also another heavy conversation, right? And again, the goal is not to come here and say black this, white that, right? That's not the platform that we have here. The goal is to simply assess things as they are. This is food for thought, and you can do the dishes, right? As the listener. So when Carlos and I are talking about, hey, this is how certain people are impacted, and this is how some people may be more or less impacted, and this is how there's disparate impact. And the only difference the only difference is their culture or their skin color or their ethnicity. We have to call these things to the table.
Mm.
And we have to be able to do so in a manner that does not um, slighten, if that's not even a word.
I don't know if that's a word. I don't know. I've
Okay,
never heard it. I'm
okay,
not.
or misrepresent or undervalue the impact of some of these things that are occurring. If that's what I'm saying. right? We got to be able to call it what it is. And I know depending on the podcast that you may listen to, not you, I mean the listener, right? Depending on the TV show you may watch, depending on whether it's Fox, MSNBC, or CNN, you may feel more or not closely tied to some of these issues and what the symptoms are. But we have to be able to talk about it. We have to be able to navigate it because there are so many young people, people of color, white children, people that children of immigrants that come to this country and they see these things, and ultimately we need to be able to address them as they are. I have white friends that when we talk about these dynamics, they're like, yo, this is bullshit. They never told us this, right? They're upset for me, right? They have that empathy of saying, like, hey, this is crazy.
Right.
It's
I
also
also,
another reason why.
for me personally, I also feel like where we're at in our own personal journeys and what we do for living, the education, the knowledge that we've accumulated over the years, we now have, I think, a moral obligation to share this information and break it down for folks who may not even realize that this is happening to them
Right.
or around them. And I think it's important for them to see it and hear it from people who look and sound just like them. Because let's be honest, these banks are moving with indifference for our communities, for our issues, for our struggles, and it's going to take some compassion there. It's going to start with us, obviously first. I'm gonna focus on my folks, and I also want to be able to say like I did something, because I don't think with the knowledge you have now, you're not afforded that anymore. You see it, you know what it is. So now you have to make a choice. What are you gonna do with that information? Are you gonna sit there, stay shut about it, and act like, hey, it didn't happen to me, I'm good? Or you're like, you know what, that is messed up. It could happen to me, or it could happen to someone I know or care about. I should do something about that. And bring it to work too. Like I have situations all the time at work where I'm advocating for clients where I feel like um, the the firm is kind of just treating them with indifference, all because of these. I would say bias, because I've definitely seen similar files, and just because the name of the business or the last name is a little different, it gets looked at like, is that really a quality client? Was this the best client selection we could have done for this product? And at the end of the day, if the client wanted it, they applied for it, and they qualified, that shouldn't matter. You get what I'm saying?
Yo, and that's what it should be. Funny scenario. So I used to work at this branch, right? I used to work in a bank, and I was trying to get my uncle to open a business account. Didn't come see me. Right? As soon as I leave that branch, what does my uncle do? Goes to that branch, opens a business account, right? Okay, we'll talk about that later. And when he walks in, I hate to say this, but that current manager completely profiled him. So he walked in and said, hey, I'm so and so, I'm looking to open a business account. And she's like, oh, okay, well, you have to be registered with the Secretary of State. He's like,
oh yeah.
He's like, oh.
For a lot of listeners, they're not gonna understand what that means right there. But that I fully understand what she meant by that comment right there.
Do you really have a business? It's basically
you know
what
what I'm
saying.
saying. She checked them on it. Like
she checked them on it. And
I
listen,
said, I'm here to open a business. Stutter. You know what I mean?
And very profitable business. I don't want to put his business out there, but he does well for himself, right? So very a legitimate business owner. Okay, well, it has to be in the Secretary of State, and this is the amount of money you have to keep in the account. Can you make a deposit today? Before this guy sits down and even talks about his business, no, before it needs assessment, before learning about what you do, why you do it, how long you've done it, how can the bank help, before any of that conversation, it's like, hey, you got to make sure your business is registered, and do you have enough money to put into the account? And I know that's not the quality of service that's supposed to be delivered.
Bro, I'm not a video person, but I think like a cool documentary or visual social experiment is sending people to banks with the same script, asking for the same thing. We just send one in black, we send one in white. Boom. And we just let it rock out. and just watch and just listen to how different they're going to be talked to, listen to how different they're going to be treated. I think the level of service, how different that's going to be. I'd be even interested to hear, the product offerings and just how they go about that process differently. I'm telling you, I think it'd be entertaining as hell. It's not.
Of course,
if anybody could do that, I'd watch that.
And my uncle's big and black, by the way. He's a big dark skinned, threatening one, right? So I'm pretty sure that led to what took place. And again, it's what I mentioned earlier. It doesn't matter how much policy we have in place, how many committees we form, how many laws we pass. Like, people have to be able to change in their hearts, right?
Right.
I've learned along my journey is that people are different. These differences give us strength. I can learn from someone that's different than me. There's nothing wrong with embracing diversity, man. I mean, you done been to my crib, man. Some of the best cookouts are when we got a little flavor from here, a little flavor from over there, got a little flavor from here, and we all bring our potluck together to have something beautiful, right? Like, that's how I look at how people should embrace diversity, and that is not uniform. Right. I'm just projecting in my mind what I would like to see one day, but these are things that occur, and the fact that systematically people of color have been able to be denied mortgages, refinances, the opportunity to own land, the opportunity to improve their overall financial portfolio, just because of bias, is something that I've always thought about from the first time I came into banking, bro. When I first learned about what redlining was, and actually before I learned what redlining was, and I saw how different people were treated differently. Like in Bridgeport, we had a lot of Spanish business owners, and the way that sometimes they get spoken to, or the way they would get engaged, it'd be different than the same business owner comes in with a shirt and tie. He appears to be white collar and just happens to be American. Right. I've seen that.
Mm-hmm. Same here.
We've talked about the difference of customer service, or the level of customer service that people receive when they come into the bank when there's not someone who speaks the same language as them, right? So we have evidence that Spanish-speaking people, if they go to a bank and there's no one that speaks Spanish, makes sense that their needs are not going to be interpreted as correctly as they should, and so are those solutions. Creole, Haitian, Chinese, whatever, right? So a lot of my mind. A lot of the times I feel as if communities in their banks should have like some sort of synergy, where the people that are working in these banks are working in these communities, or policing these communities, are as diverse as of the community. That's all I'm saying. That's what I would like to see one day. And I'm not saying it's like, hey, if you live in a Spanish town that only Spanish people could do certain things, or if you live in a Jamaican part of town that, hey, everywhere you go, it has to be Jamaican people at the store. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying, though, is that I would like to see us get to a space where our communities and their diversity are represented in the institutions that they keep in business.
Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, that's exactly how a bank was supposed to function. I think, obviously when we get these larger multinational corporations, they're obviously going to lose sight of that, but that does not mean that you can't make a concerted effort on a local level to kind of keep that energy there. You know what I mean? And for me, I think we also have to continue to call them out, because every single bank has that, that touchy, feel good commercial about, we care about you, we put you at the center of everything we do, but yet, behind closed doors and these meetings, is that what they're talking about? Absolutely not. Or is it even something that they care about? I don't think so. I think it's more pageantry than anything. And I think conversations like this, maybe further legislation, oversight, whatever the case may be, or just a heightened consciousness of the people who are in these positions of power and leadership to actually want to do the right thing and treat all humans with some respect and some dignity.
Yeah, man. Yeah. It's funny, man. But these are conversations that we want to continue to have. Our goal is just basically to hold up the mirror to the world and let the world see itself. So if you're listening to this podcast, like, subscribe, share it with your friends, family. Add some ideas for discussion points that we can peel back, because ultimately we want you to leave this podcast being a better you.
Yeah, or
And
yeah, walk away with some new information, a new
yeah,
perspective, and like really approach it with questions. And for me, I think the greatest question that's come up in my mind when it came to today's topic and the articles that we discussed is why I think it's just too simple. Um, but I think a better question would be, what's the benefit for people doing these practices and these acts? You know, who are the players? Who's winning? Who's losing?
right,
Why? And I think when we start to connect those dots, things start to make a little bit more sense, or maybe other questions pop up.
right.
But for me specifically, like, what was that appraisal company getting out of devaluing Dr. Connolly's home by so much? What was in it for you to do that? You know what I mean? Like, how do you benefit? How do you
It could have
benefit
been
from that?
envy. It could have been
Could be
envy.
a
Hey,
lot
I
of
can't.
things.
This person has something that maybe I can't attain, or you're mad that he has it too. I mean, I don't even want to. It's hard for me to think like that because I'm not that type of person,
Right.
and I just couldn't conceptualize why you want to purposely do harm to anyone in that
Hmm.
regard, especially when it comes to something that serious. But obviously, this appraiser did not care.
Right. And I think another good question for us is, how do we protect ourselves from situations like this?
Well, financial literacy is huge.
Mm.
And that's why conversations around how we should approach a bank, what to do to become mortgage ready, what to do when we're mortgage ready, how to sustain our home, and even what to do when we get our home in terms of the selling versus retaining your equity component. We have to be able to have these conversations as a group because they aren't taught in schools. And if you don't have parents that have owned businesses, owned properties, establish wealth for themselves, these are things that may be foreign to you. And for the young person out there that's stuck in whatever they're stuck in, and they're trying to get into a different financial situation or trying to change their stars, that information is there. This thing we call the internet allows us access to information at a much higher rates than before. So my goal is, you know, the next generation, as they're trying to acquire knowledge and information, that it comes a little bit faster than it came from me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's definitely more accessible. I will say. I will
Yeah,
say it's definitely more accessible because let's be honest, the financial literacy thing, the I am seeing some states making it a requirement in high school, which I feel like is long overdue. Which is I think is a good step in the right direction. You know, you got kids coming out here, graduating high school, knowing how to do the Pythagorean theorem, but can't balance a checkbook. That makes no sense, or at least not even understanding how credit works. So if you're really gonna prepare these young adults for life in America, they better come out of high school knowing that. You know, who knows? Maybe even start putting those building blocks in middle school. I don't know. I'm not an educator. I don't know when the ideal time would be, but I know it should happen by the time they graduate, and the world's going to be treating them and seeing them as an adult, and they are going to get their first credit card, student loans. You know, maybe want to venture out on a business idea, whatever the case may be.
right.
Financial literacy, they're going to need that, and it is sad that a lot of us we're not going to get it from our parents, but that's okay. We also don't want to rely on the bank to do it because that banker coming in on the weekend, I mean, coming into your class and talking for an hour, for a lot of people, that's the only amount of financial literacy they got. And
Right.
most of the times, that banker or that organization is doing it for exposure, not that they actually want you to learn anything, So I don't think that that's the most appropriate actor to be doing that work. I do think it should be coming from, um, you know, educators and institutions of learning, whether it be public, private, college, middle school, high school, and it should be free. I don't think anybody should be paying for anything.
Yo, you know what episode, switching gears. You know what episode I want to do, bro? And
What?
I didn't even talk to him about this first yet, ladies and gentlemen. This is how real it is. Yo, I want to do an episode on Puerto Rico and World War II. Was it
Uh,
World War One and World War II where the United States showed up? They were looking for boys, and they took a bunch of Puerto
oh,
Ricans with the promise of statehood, and which was never returned, which is why
yeah.
Puerto
Well,
Rico is a
we
Commonwealth.
can. Yeah, that's one. How about this? That's one I promise we'll do with Alexis, who's my co-host for
Okay.
for the listeners who don't know. I have a Puerto Rican history and politics podcast. I'll talk to Alexis. I think it'd be dope for all of us to chop it up because I've always wanted an episode where we have someone live who may not know that story in full and just kind of see their reaction to, and see what that situation really is. But yeah, that'd be dope, man. We should do that. I'm gonna talk to him. I introduce the good folks to Alexis, another dope cat.
We got to do that. We got to do the Haitian Revolution. Talk about my man Toussaint. Yeah.
You know what's crazy? I met the quick story. I met an individual, right? And he was actually mentioning these leaders, and I asked him if he ever, read about his life, and I gave him a book recommendation, and he never read it, but he was super interested. I hope I see him again because I recommended Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, and that book, that one does two things. One, it gives you a true perspective of who Toussaint was, and how he ascended to be such the great revolutionary leader that he was, and right. Two, what slavery really looked like, not this whitewashed version that we get in school. There's no censorship. Every detail is spelled out as far as the treatment, torture, killing of slaves. And, I'm sorry, I don't want to use the term slaves. Enslaved peoples. I'm trying to be more
understood.
Conscious of the language we use, because when we lay them as slaves, we take their humanity away. These were enslaved people. And yeah, so it had an impact on him, and he Googled it right then and there. I think he ordered it on Amazon. So I'm gonna talk to him next time and see if he actually read it.
Yo, there's so much dope shit to talk about. History, real life is wilder than fiction.
Yeah, it's right? True. It's true. I tell people all the time, you don't gotta pick up, some novel to be entertained. A lot of times, the best entertainment I got was from history or some political science book that was like, yo, this really happened, which makes it even more entertaining for me. It's like, yo, this is real character. I could go look this guy up.
And they don't teach this, they don't teach this to you in schools, right? I don't know if I told this to you, but I learned about redlining. It was I was in training for a bank, and I was in some onboarding course.
Yeah. And
this guy came in and he was talking about redlining, right? And just diversity and impact in low to moderate income communities. And he goes, "What? You think a redheaded white dude from Kansas should know about redlining?" And then he goes, "Well, if I know about it, why don't you as a person of color do?" That's what he said to me. And when he said, right, and I didn't even think he was going to bring it to me like that, but that let me know that there was farther to go down the rabbit hole. There was more information to understand. There was more knowledge to gain about our history and why we're here, and some of the things that may keep us in this position, right? And some of the victories that we've had. That's another part of it. They don't like to talk about rebellions because that makes people rebellious. But that's another conversation.
Oh yeah, we could do this all day, man. We could do this all day.
Yo, listen, like, subscribe, share the Universal Frequency Podcast. This is Carlos J. Japaro. I'm FNX. We appreciate you hanging out with us, and yeah, let's get to it. Have a good night.
Peace and love.
Energy, frequency, vibration. Energy, frequency.